Deuteronomy and Hosea. In Hosea, we'll be in chapter 4, verse 6. Hosea 4:6. The title of the message is Repercussions of Man's Response to the Law. The repercussions of man's response to the law. There's three basic types of miscommunication. That's man's major problem. Even if you cut God out of the equation, man still has the problem of communicating to man. We got to figure that one out. Of the three types of miscommunication, there's misunderstanding. That is, I've communicated something to you and you just don't understand it. There's not understanding, as in you didn't even get the message. It just went right by you. And then misinterpretation. You got it, but I'm thinking something different than you're thinking. Misunderstanding is simple. It means when the receiver understands a message differently than what the sender had intended. So that would be like a for sale sign for a dog. Says, dog for sale, eats anything and is fond of children. Well, wait a minute. I don't think they intended it to sound like that.
That almost sounds like thunder.
Right. Or the used car sales ad that says used cars. Why go anywhere else and be cheated? Come here first. Or the ad for literacy. Says illiterate with a question mark. Write today for help. Well, if you're illiterate, that's not going to happen. Missed or not processed information. This happens when the message receives no interpretation at all, or it receives so much interpretation you can't decipher what it means. Like a phone call. A phone call, a lot of times you won't be able to catch everything that's being said. It's in and out of service, and it cracks up, and too much static on the line. That's what happens. That's what happens that'll cause a misinterpretation. My wife will say, go to the store and buy 3, and then I don't know what she's saying. So I think that means go get 3 hamburgers, And then I hear a 5, so that must mean 5 guys on the way, So
That's where we're going.
That's right. That's not getting all the information. And we find that quite often nowadays with the modern version. Oh, it's got a bunch of words in it, but they're not all there. So you kind of interpret it a little differently. Okay, that's a misinterpretation for what was actually intended. All of these things lead to what the Bible calls a curse. If you do not understand, if the communication breaks down between God and man, God declares it a curse. He curses for that. Hosea chapter 4, verse 6. He says, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because thou hast rejected knowledge, I also will reject thee, that thou shalt be no priest to me, seeing thou hast forgotten the law of thy God. I will also forget thy children. God gave man his law. That's God's given law. That's from heaven. God gave man his law. However, man's response to the law determines his outcome. There's nothing wrong with God's communication. He communicated. He made man. He knows what we understand and don't understand. He knows very clearly how to communicate to us. But there's plenty wrong with man's understanding. Our mind is messed up to begin with. We can't even understand what he's saying until we pour in more of what he's saying. That's the way you understand what he's saying. So let's look at this subject. The first thing that's needed is comprehension. Comprehension. In the Bible, that's coded with a word. The word for comprehension in the Bible is understand. That makes it pretty plain. Understand. Understand, that word is used 5 times to refer to 5 different subjects in the book of Deuteronomy. So we'll look at those today. There's 5 subjects in Deuteronomy. It's actually used more than 5 times, but it's 5 subjects that it's referring to. There's a comprehension on a local level. Now, this is just human to human, what we understand. Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 13. Deuteronomy 1:13. Deuteronomy 1, verse 13 to 15. This is just local, human to human, man to man, his comprehension. Comprehension on a local level. Moses says, "Take ye wise men and understanding," there's our word, "and known among your tribes, and I will make them rulers over you. And ye answered me and said, The thing which thou hast spoken to us is good for us to do. So I took the chief of your tribes, wise men and known, made them heads over you, captains over thousands, captains over hundreds, captains over 50s, captains over tens, and officers among your tribes." Okay, so he says, look around. We need somebody who knows how to communicate, and we need someone who understands things. So y'all decide. You notice there's no God in that. There's no let's ask God who he wants.
Right.
I'll choose. Y'all get together and decide. We're all a bunch of idiots down here, but let's find the smartest stupid man and let's put him in charge. That's what they're saying. And to a degree, that just has to happen. That's human life. Just as man to man, we are all idiots. And you look for the one who makes the least mistakes. That's just normal. However, when we put it in a biblical sense, there's no need for that, because we can find somebody smarter than human and let them run it. In 2 Corinthians, Paul says, they measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves among themselves are not wise. So the very criteria he used to pick leaders was compare among yourselves. Find out who's wise, who's understanding, and we'll put them in charge. Paul says, when you start doing that, you're not wise. Everybody failed from the beginning. Okay, that's comprehension on a local level. Let's see comprehension on a global level. This will be found in Deuteronomy 4, verse 5 to 6. Comprehension on a global level. Deuteronomy 4, verse 5 to 6. "Behold, I have taught you statutes and judgments, even as the Lord my God commanded me, that you should do so in the land whither you go to possess it. Keep, therefore, and do them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding." There's that comprehension. "In the sight of the nations, which shall hear all these statutes and say, Surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people." Okay, this is intended not really for your good, but for everybody else to look around and see it, for the other nations to observe. That's what God intended. He wanted the whole world to look and say, hey, that nation's got something on the ball that we hadn't figured out yet. He says what's going to do it is if you'll just obey what I tell you to do. Here's some law, here's some commandments. What this is going to do, you're not going to be able to see it because you're sitting so close to it. But the other nations are going to look and they're going to say, oh, those are wise people. Those people have some understanding. The next comprehension we see is comprehension of a providential level. That is Deuteronomy 9, verse 3. A providential level. That's, you know what providence is. That's God working something out without your input. Deuteronomy 9, verse 3. Comprehension on a providential level. Deuteronomy 9:3. "Understand therefore this day that the Lord thy God is he which goeth over before thee as a consuming fire. He shall destroy them. He shall bring them down before thy face. So shalt thou drive them out and destroy them quickly, as the Lord hath said unto thee." So there's the providential level, is that God's going to go before you and handle it. Okay, that takes some real understanding. Even in our life, day to day, it's hard to imagine he's already been there and done that, because we don't see it that way yet. As far as all we can see is he needs to show up and do this. No, sir, he's already been there and done that. He's gone before and prepared the way. That's providential. That takes some real understanding. That's not natural. The next understanding, or the next comprehension, is on a personal level. Deuteronomy 9:6. Deuteronomy 9:6. On a personal level, there's something you individually should know. Deuteronomy 9:6. Understand, therefore, that the Lord thy God giveth thee not this good land into possession for thy righteousness. Here's what you need to know. For thou art a stiff-necked people. He says, what you really need to know, one of the things that's important for you to know, is look in the mirror. You're no good. You're a stiff-necked, rebellious, stubborn people. And when God does you good, it's not because you deserved it.
Amen.
And that's what he told them. He said, you need to know this. It's important. That's understanding. That'll give you some comprehension. There's one other thing that we find from the word understand in the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 28. Calamity is leveled for a lack of comprehension. God levels calamity if you will not comprehend what he's told you. Deuteronomy 28, verse 45. Deuteronomy 28, verse 45. Moreover, all these curses shall come upon thee, and shall pursue thee, and overtake thee, till thou be destroyed, because thou hearkenest not unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to keep his commandments and his statutes which he commanded thee. And they shall be upon thee for a sign and for a wonder, and upon thy seed forever, because thou servest not the Lord thy God, with joyfulness and with gladness of heart. What a thing to put in there talking about curses. He said, look, you want to run around and not obey the commandments and have a grumpy attitude? I'll curse you for that. God intends us to be joyful and have glad hearts while we're obeying commandments. And he says, if you won't do that, curse comes with it. Verse 48. Therefore shalt thou serve thine enemies, which the Lord shall send amongst thee, in hunger and in thirst, in nakedness, and in want of all things. And he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck until he have destroyed thee. The Lord shall bring a nation against thee from afar, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth, a nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand. Did you want to act like you don't understand my commandments? When it's all said and done, I'm going to fix it so you don't understand what's being said around you. Understanding, comprehension is important. God gives us his law. We need to do something with it. In Deuteronomy 32, verse 28. Deuteronomy 32, verse 28. Talking about this same people in this same position. Deuteronomy 32, 28. For they are a nation void of counsel, neither is there any understanding in them. Oh, that they were wise, that they understood this, that they would consider their latter end. He says there, this nation has lost all their sense. They ain't got a brain in their noggin. They can't. Yeah, that's right. They can't think straight. He says, I wish they would. I wish they would understand. Well, how would they understand? Go back to the law and obey it. And then do it with joyfulness and happiness. That's how you obey commandments and please God. Now, you can obey commandments, and this is what Israel did, without joyfulness. They obeyed commands simply because it was a form, it was a religion, it was an outward show. However, they had an attitude problem the whole time they were doing it. Well, it led to their downfall. Deuteronomy 32, verse 31. Here's the other thing that is important. You have to have discernment. You can't just obey rules and follow everything you see that claims to be God. You end up in a mess. Deuteronomy 32, verse 31. For their rock is not our rock, You better have some discernment. Even our enemies themselves being judged. For their vine is the vine of Sodom, and of the fields of Gomorrah. Their grapes are the grapes of gall. Their clusters are bitter. If you can't tell that, first of all, you didn't have any discernment. You didn't know what God considered a good grape. Secondly, you didn't have any discernment after you ate it, and you didn't realize, hey, that's sour. You should have been. Your taste buds should have woke you up and said, hey, this one ain't good. You do that with pecans. I like pecans. You can crack a pecan and eat it. Some of them are good and some of them are not. And when you get one that's not good, you got to eat 4 or 5 good ones to get that flavor out of your mouth. He said these people are so stupid they can't even tell what they're tasting. That's their problem. Verse 33, their wine is the poison of dragons and the cruel venom of asps. Is not this laid up in store with me? What? Discernment. That's where you get discernment, is God. God's the one who has the discernment. He understands right and wrong. That's where you get it from. If you flee from him, you don't know what tastes good and what tastes bad. And sealed among my treasures. Okay, treasures are something you give somebody you like. Okay? Make him like you. He'll give you some wisdom. Okay, that's the first point. The second point we want to make is a needed element. And I'm not going to go to Greek and Hebrew. I don't like going to Greek and Hebrew. But we are going to learn English. There's nothing wrong with knowing a little bit of English. I'm going to give you a word that you've probably never heard of before. And we'll use it enough that you'll remember it. Celerity. Celerity. It's spelled Celerity. Celerity. It means acceleration, to move swiftly and quickly with a determined attitude. Okay, that's celerity.
The root word celery.
It looks like celery, but it's the opposite of celery. Celery is a vegetable that grows slow. Celerity moves fast, just the opposite. It comes from the Latin root celer, as in accelerator, to move quickly. God's law is to be acted on with celerity. That's the way he intends it. And to show us that, he uses another word. We saw the word understand. He's going to use another word. This word is quickly. Quickly. Celerity. Determined to move. Not just moving because you're moving, but it's moving with determination. Deuteronomy 9, verse 3. God's law is to be acted on with celerity by participation. In Deuteronomy 9, verse 3, he says, understand therefore this day that the Lord thy God is he which goeth over before thee as a consuming fire. He shall destroy them, and he shall bring them down before thy face. So shalt thou drive them out, and destroy them how? Quickly, as the Lord hath said unto thee. So the first half of that verse we enjoy. God's going to do it, God's going to do it. It's going to be devastation and disaster, and he's going to knock them down. But then we're not so happy about the next half of it. So shalt thou drive them out. Something for you to do too. And destroy them. He already showed you the example. Destroy them quickly. Quickly. That is a determined act. You decided you're going to do it. And you do it with a quickness. That's a tough one. You'll find that throughout your whole life is tweaking your response times. A lot of times, you'll notice this with your Bible reading. You'll be reading the Bible and God will show you something. And you'll be like, oh, that's good, and I know 2 other verses that go with that, but I'm really chasing something else right now. And then you'll finish whatever it is you thought you were chasing, and then you want to go back and get the one little nugget that you saw but you didn't write down, and it's gone. You can't find it. I showed them one this morning in Sunday school. They found it for me. In Deuteronomy 10, verse 17, he said, y'all don't have to, this is just fun stuff. Deuteronomy 10, 17, it says, "For the Lord your God is God of gods." Okay. "And Lord of lords, a great God." It's a good verse to know there, because that shows there are other gods. "And they all answer to mine." And then the verse that was in my head, but I was following so many other things I didn't write it down, was in Psalms. He says he sits among the nation and congregation and judges amongst the gods. Okay, so that proves to you, yeah, there's other deities out there that have zero authority. What good's a deity without authority? It's nothing. That's the devil. That's any other god you want to follow. They have to sit in a congregation to be judged, and God's the one doing the judgment. But that's the way it is. You got to move quickly. When God says, "Hey, here's something for you, here's something for you," get the pen out, get to writing, get to work. Move it quickly, determined to do it. By nature, the flesh runs with celerity to perversion. Your natural propensity is to pursue wickedness as quick as you can get it. This flesh wants to be satisfied, and you just naturally will follow its lead quickly to self-satisfaction, whatever you perceive that as. In Deuteronomy 9, verse 12. Deuteronomy 9, verse 12. This is God talking to Moses. Moses has been up on the mountain getting the commandments. "And the Lord said unto me, Arise, get thee down quickly." Okay, Moses, celerity, kick it in. "From hence, for thy people which thou hast brought forth out of Egypt have corrupted themselves." How'd they do it? "They are quickly turned aside out of the way which I commanded them. They have made them a molten image." Just normal. That's the normal thing that happens. The flesh just takes over. You will by nature run after wickedness. Why not determine to run after holiness? It's got to be a determined action on your part. Celebration of man always results in a response in like manner from God. The celebration of man is going to be done in proportion as God determines. Deuteronomy 32:21. Deuteronomy 32:21. Now, God's proportions might be a little different than what we think is fair. But we got to know what they are. There's no hidden agenda here. He's laid it all out in black and white.
Amen.
I mean, we've got the rules ahead of time. Deuteronomy 32:21. "They have moved me to jealousy with that which is not God. They have provoked me to anger with their vanities. I will move them to jealousy with those which are not a people. I will provoke them to anger with a foolish nation." God says, okay, I'll act in kind. They want to move swiftly toward wickedness. I'll move swiftly toward their destruction. That sounds cruel, but that's fair. Think about it. If you're going to treat God, the ruler of the universe, that way, wouldn't it just be fair for him to treat you that way? Matter of fact, that's still merciful.
Amen.
Look at Leviticus 26. Leviticus 26, verse 23. Leviticus 26, verse 23. It's amazing God lets us have his law. Imagine this. A holy, righteous, perfect, just God creates a way for us to understand his mind and gives it to us. And then we act like the idiots that we are and he allows us to apologize and get right. And he allows us to still not get everything right and still be an idiot, maybe in areas we don't even know yet, and use his law to talk about us to be the representative of what he has to say. That takes some grace right there on his part. Leviticus 26, verse 23. He says, if you will not be reformed by me, by these things, but will walk contrary to me, then will I also walk contrary to you, and will punish you yet 7 times for your sins. Punishment means you're still breathing. Okay? So that's still mercy. You've offended the highest authority on a human level and on a supernatural level. Okay, for him to allow you to still breathe, that's mercy. That's grace. An owner of anything, an owner always has more motivation to move with celerity to defend his property than someone else. If it's my van you're about to break into, I will probably be quicker on the draw to tell you to move along than if it's Chris and Shiloh's vehicle.
Thank you.
You know, I might say, hey, let me know if you find anything good in there. If you got more than you can carry, I might help you. No. God's the same way. You and I are the same way. What we own, we feel responsible for. And if anybody's going to come against it, buddy, we're going to defend it. That's celerity, moving fastly. Okay, let's notice the proprietor here. Deuteronomy 32:35. The owner always has the motivation to move with celerity to defend his own property. God is the proprietor. Deuteronomy 32:35. Deuteronomy 32:35. God talking. To me belongeth vengeance. That's his. Man, if man's taking vengeance on something, he's stealing it from God. You don't have vengeance. You don't know where that is. God is the one who owns vengeance. It's his. If you're going to take vengeance, first you take it from God, and then you take it out on a person. Vengeance is owned. It's owned by God. To me belongeth vengeance and recompense. Their foot shall slide in due time, for the day of their calamity is at hand, and the things that shall come upon them make haste. Celerity, it's moving fast. Okay, the next thing we need to see is a commemoration. As far as God's law, man is intended to commemorate it. That makes it important to us. Remember is the word God uses for this. Remember. That's to recall or to show respect on purpose. Deuteronomy 9, verse 7. Deuteronomy 9, verse 7. Deuteronomy 9, verse 7. He says, remember and forget not. That's saying, remember, remember. If you forgot it, you didn't remember it. He's saying, remember, but I know how old you are. In 10 minutes, you're probably going to forget what you just remembered. So don't. Remember and don't forget. How thou provokest the Lord thy God to wrath in the wilderness, from the day that thou didst depart out of the land of Egypt, until thou camest unto this place, ye have been rebellious against the Lord. Okay, so commemorate it. Remember, I've been an idiot. I've done things that there's no excuse for, and God had mercy on me. Remember, that's a good thing to remember. He said, don't forget it. Why? Because it puts you in your place. It keeps him in his place. It lets you know that he's been merciful to you, and you're the one that needed mercy. You aren't God, he is God. That's a very simple concept, but we need to remember it, and we don't need to forget it. Look at chapter 32, Deuteronomy 32, verse 28. We've read this before, but let's see it now. Deuteronomy 32, 28. For they are a nation void of counsel, neither is there any understanding in them. Oh, that they were wise, that they understood this, that they would consider their latter end. Consider the latter end. That's what's important. Commemorate it. Do something that will force you to remember it. You'll find all throughout the Old Testament they're doing special things to commemorate an event. They come through the Red Sea. They come through the Jordan River. Every time they're building an altar. They're putting some stones up here. They're writing a memorial. They're writing a book to explain to their children what happened over here. It's always something so that they can point back to, not themselves, but God. If they get any limelight, it's, look what he had to overlook in me. But he did. And now we've got to be careful because it'll be tempting to steal his glory. Even talking about him, it'll be tempting to steal his glory. We'll make much of self and little of the deliverer. That's a wrong balance. You find that even people's testimonies. I can't stand the people's testimonies whose lifelong wickedness is brought to the forefront, and you've got 30 minutes of that and 10 minutes of, and I got saved. That balance is way off askew. That's a memorial to self. No, let's put one up to God. The other thing we see here is the certification of God's promise. God certifies his word. As if it wasn't enough just to supernaturally give us his word from heaven, he certifies it. It becomes a legal document. Look at Deuteronomy 32:40. Deuteronomy 32, verse 40. For I lift my hand to heaven and say, I live forever. Okay, get the picture here. This is God putting himself on trial. He's come to the court of law, and he says, I can't swear on a Bible by God to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. He is the truth. So he says, tell you what I'll do. I'll do the next thing. I'll just lift my hand to heaven and say, hey, it's me. I'm here. And I'll promise on myself that, hey, I do live forever. I'm not dying. And here's what I'm going to tell you. This is how true it is. I'm basing it on myself. If I whet my glittering sword, and mine hand take hold on judgment, I will render vengeance to mine enemies, and will reward them that hate me. I will make mine arrows drunk with blood, and my sword shall devour flesh, and that with the blood of the slain of the captives, from the beginning of the ravages upon the enemy. God says, I promise you, I'll do what I say I'm going to do. Okay, so his law is important. He signed it and said, it's so important, I'll promise on myself that I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do. If I've given you a law means do this or else. Don't do this or this happens. Signed, God, I promise. Look at it in Luke chapter 19. Luke chapter 19, verse 41. This must have been the thought on Jesus' mind when he gives us this report right here. Luke 19, verse 41. Luke 19:41. This is Jesus. And when he was come near, he beheld the city and wept over it, saying, if thou hadst known, even thou, at least in this thy day, the things which belonged unto thy peace. Okay, if you had obeyed the law and gotten the result of that, but you didn't, what happens? But now are they hid from thine eyes. Romans chapter 11, verse 43. For the day shall come upon thee that thine enemies shall cast a trench about thee, and compass thee around, and keep thee on every side, and shall lay thee even with the ground, and thy children within thee, and they shall not leave thee one stone upon another, because thou knewest, there's that understanding, not the time of thy visitation. And he went unto the temple, and began to cast out them which sold therein, and them that bought. He said, look, you didn't know it when it was time. God's already promised he's going to do what he does. If you don't follow what he's told you to, the commandments and the laws, I've got to do what I've got to do because he's God. Jesus shows up on the scene. He says, I've given them the commandments. I've reiterated the law from God, and they've not obeyed it. They've not heeded it. And then he says, he cries right there. He cries over the city. He says, I wish they had turned. If they had only known this was the time, had they heeded the commandments, they would have gotten what they needed, peace. But because they didn't, I'm going to give them just the opposite of peace. Just like God's promise. He swore an oath on himself. He's got to uphold it. There's a cure. There is a cure. If you're breathing, there's still the ability to get a cure. In Hosea chapter 14, God gives us a prescription to be part of the exception. He's got some stiff rules and regulations, buddy. But he's also got some fine print that says I can put you in the exception category. You can be grandsoned in. Hosea 14, verse 1 to 3. Hosea says, O Israel, return unto the Lord thy God, for thou hast fallen by thine iniquity. Well, we know that. Verse 2. Take with you words. Plural. Plural. Not take with you this word. No, words. Plural. Every word's important. Furthermore, if you don't have them all, then you don't have the message. The totality of each individual words equals the message. He says, take with you words, and turn to the Lord, and say unto him, take away all iniquity, and receive us graciously. So we will render the calves of our lips. Asher shall not save us. We will not ride upon horses. Neither will we say any more unto the work of our hands, ye are our gods. For in thee the fatherless find mercy. There's the answer. The answer is turn to him. And don't just turn to him and try to come up with something to say. That's our problem. Remember, that's what got us in the mess to begin with. We started counting on how smart we were. Our knowledge, our wisdom, our understanding wasn't any good. He says, no, try it this way. I'm going to go ahead and tell you what words to say. When you show up, if you want to return to God, don't show up in his presence and start trying to think of what you're going to say. No, here's the words. Memorize them. Now, it takes God's word to return to God. That's all he wants to hear. He doesn't care about your words. It doesn't have anything to do with what you think. Our thinking's no good to begin with. Amen. He says, when you want to return to God, get in his word. Repeat his word to him. Then he'll take note. Man's the same way. The smartest person in a room is usually ourselves, and that's all we want to listen to. God's the same way, only it's true for him. Amen. The smartest person, the wisest, is him. What he wants to hear is his words. Okay, repeat those to him. You want to get right with God? Get right with God. But don't do it with your words. Take these words and return to him. All right, let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you that you lay out in detail everything that we'll need for life, and that even when we mess up and we fall, that you've already given us a prescription how to return. We pray that we would get in your word and find exactly what we should say to you and how we should talk and how we should live. In your name we pray, amen.